This is the Breaking Up with Binge Eating podcast, where every listen moves you one step closer to complete food freedom. Hosted by me, Georgie Fear, and my team at Confident Eaters. Welcome back to the Breaking Up with Binge Eating podcast. I'm Georgie Fear, and today I'm joined by Tina, who actually is a listener who wrote me a letter about a week ago. And she had such great questions that I invited her on the show so we could just have a conversation, because I think the issues that she wants to talk about are very common ones that many people listening can probably find some interest and some personal resonance with. So thank you, Tina, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Before we started the recording, you were saying that you had been sort of midway in recovery. So tell me how you started listening to the show.
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, I really wanted to sort of double down on my recovery. And in conjunction with meeting with a therapist, I would listen to a specific number of podcasts and follow a couple of Instagram accounts from anti diet culture or intuitive eating dietitians that I found really helpful, just for that sort of daily reinforcement or tuning up of the concepts that I really wanted to cement.
That's awesome. It is so important to filter the voices that we listen to and the things that we're exposed to on social media. So
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely encourage people to do the same. If you surround yourself with accounts that make you feel bad, often I think they're disguised as inspiration, but they're unrealistic body types or people with really regimented or fringe eating habits. I think sometimes they can not be the best for our health. So I'm super glad that you feel like you're moving forward in your recovery. How long has this been an issue for you, your eating? And when would you say it was at its worst?
I would say, and I've kind of noticed this with many stories of people in recovery, is that something about college age or starting that young adulthood, a lot of women start to experiment, I think, with controlling their food or changing their bodies. I don't know if it's moving out or just having more agency over what they eat or just the societal pressure, but that's definitely what I found. I was in my early 20s. I downloaded Noom back when it was like more of a calorie counting app. And from there, I had Noom and I had Lose It and I had My Fitness Pal. These might be triggering terms for some people. And I just started learning about calorie counting and restriction and would be eating way too few calories and binging the whole pantry almost every night. I think in one of my lowest moments, I tried a 3-day juice cleanse. And the second it was over, drove straight to McDonald's for a huge meal. Just really I was really embedded in that binge restrict cycle for quite a long time. I'm in my mid-30s now, so I guess it's been about 15 years of kind of struggling with that in varying amounts. But I would say that I kind of started to reject diet culture and get out of that pattern maybe about 5 years ago.
Yeah, and it's an important pivot to make. I think many times people might label somebody's behavior, oh, that's disordered, or that's not healthy for you, or that's not good. And yet we cling to it and we're like, no, I want this because I want a
Mhm.
hot body and I want the sense of control and I want all these other things that society holds up as desirable. But yeah, I think it does come with maturity, the realization that life can be more than this, that people
It
who
does.
aren't pursuing the same thing that I'm pursuing so feverishly, they seem like they might be a little happier. They seem like they might be a little less stressed. So let's contrast that with now. So I'm going to read some of the email that you sent me. And so you don't have to re ask all those questions. But so this is from the email that you sent. I've been thinking about something recently and would love to get your take on it. Is it okay to just be recovered enough? Or is this the messy middle that I see being talked about online a lot lately? Taking myself as an example, I've conquered fear foods and only binge maybe once a month now. And even then, the quality and quantity of binges are not nearly what they used to be. I weigh myself once every 10 days or so and generally feel like food is not such a big deal anymore. Does that all still sound correct?
Yes, yeah, that's accurate.
And with all that being said, the email continues. I'm attempting to slowly and sustainably lose about 5 pounds, just vanity pounds, over several months, which means I'm still loosely tracking calories. You told me the number that you're aiming for a very small deficit. And then the core of your question is, does the fact that I'm even aware of these numbers mean that I'm not recovered? Or am I just recovered enough? So I love this
Mhm.
question so much. I think that like, it shows how much you're thinking about this, and not just reacting emotionally to the numbers or yourself or all the stuff that you see on the internet. So the first thought that I had when I read this email is there's no yes or no to this question. It's which I hate like giving a non-answer, but it's we all have recovered enough for us. And it's further complicated by the fact that we don't have a standard definition of recovery.
Yeah.
The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which categorizes psychological conditions, is really only needed for insurance purposes. Are we gonna stamp the label of binge eating disorder on somebody or not? But those definitions and the frequencies don't really apply to real life, and I think the question is, does somebody feel like they've gotten where they want to go? Are they happy with where they are? Then that's perfectly okay
Great.
to just decide to stay there. But what's your idea of recovers? Do you have a concept in mind?
Well, I tend to be quite type A and perfectionistic, as I'm sure you see in many of your clients. So
Gonna
I
win
think I have,
recovery.
yes, I have this idea of being completely free of food noise, completely accepting my body, never having any negative thoughts about food or myself or my body image. I always use my husband as an example. So our kids are young and they always need to go to the washroom right as dinner is served. And for me, I'm like, this is my dinner. This is like my one hot meal of the day. I want to sit down and enjoy it. And he has zero issue getting up from the table, wiping butts. It doesn't bother him at all. Whereas I find it, I wouldn't say distressing, but frustrating. And he's just so chill and relaxed about what he eats. So I always kind of hold him up as this gold star of complete food freedom that I don't know if I'll ever be able to attain, but I see this image of recovery sort of held up in society as a woman that's completely free and also so accepting of her body and loves eating vegetables and salad all the time. And I just don't know if that's ever going to be realistic for me.
Yeah, and then that's an important factor is it realistic for you? And we all start from different places too. We all have different histories, we all have different upbringings, we all have different genetics. And there's
Mm.
so much research that we all have even a different physical experience of hunger and food and appetite. So while I think it's great to look at people like your husband as our paragons of complete food freedom, there's so much that's normal that we still might pathologize, like food noise or stressing over food, or as you said, being stressed or frustrated if a meal's delayed. Like that's not
Mhm.
necessarily a disordered trait. That's that's human. We
Yeah.
all get frustrated if we're looking forward to something and then it's delayed. Do you have any ideas for what shaped that idea? You said your husband's experience. Have you read anything or listened to anything in the sort of podcast or internet sphere that has also given you thoughts on what recovery is?
Yeah, I think the idea of being able to eat perfectly intuitively all the time seems like a bit of a stretch goal or something. I don't know if it's attainable for everyone all the time. Or, reading Brain Over Binge by Katherine Hanson has been really helpful, but her story was very much like, "Oh, I decided not to binge, and I only binged 2 more times, and I have never binged again, ever."
Yeah,
And those kind of stories are, inspirational, but I don't know how realistic they can be, especially when, this has been over a decade that I've battled these sort of things. And I feel like I have a bit of imposter syndrome where, I very firmly reject diet culture and I'm quite passionate about it, especially as a mom now. I've got a son and a daughter. And it's very important to me, to model a healthy relationship with my body and with my food. But then it's almost like a dirty little secret that like I'm recovered. I reject diet culture, but I also kind of loosely know the numbers of what I'm taking in. And
sure.
I also, if I'm being perfectly honest, what I love to just snap my fingers and lose 10 pounds. Sure. And it gives me these feelings of being a little conflicted about how far along I actually am in my recovery and having sort of that cognitive dissonance between, knowing what I should do in order to be fully recovered, which maybe is throw out the scale, never track a calorie again, and what I realistically feel like I can work into my life without it feeling like a burden or causing binges or crazy amounts of food noise, which would be, loosely knowing my intake or checking on my weight maybe once every 10 days or 2 weeks.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of times there is benefit in that middle ground. Maybe
Mhm.
you don't have to go all or nothing on recovery, like it's a contest. I mean, most people have some degree of concern over their appearance or their body weight. So, it would be abnormal to not care at all about
Yeah.
what a person looked like, just as it's problematic if that's the focus of somebody's day and they're spending, like, hours a day in appearance-focused behaviors. So, I think there is a wide range of what's considered normal or healthy, and I like to look at what various behaviors are costing somebody. If you ask people like, "Hey, f so for free and with no effort, would you like to lose 10 pounds?" I think 99% of people would be like, "Yes." Most people would
Mhm.
have some degree of wanting to change their body, and I guess the real issue is how much psychological discomfort does that cause somebody? Is it really harmful to somebody's self-esteem, or can we reach a place where we feel more accepting of how we look, given that it isn't our ideal? I
Right.
wouldn't hold myself up as the paragon of perfection here by any means, or recovery done right, but I have found a lot of comfort in the fact that I didn't have to look exactly as I thought was ideal to be good enough. I
Yeah.
found it was really helpful to actually prioritize appearance less and really ascribe to the mantra that my appearance is the least interesting thing about me. So, it starts to sort of demote itself in importance when you start to think about what's the work I'm doing? How much fun am I having each day? Am I
Mhm.
connecting with other people really well? I think sometimes focusing on other areas of our life is the most helpful recovery step, and just letting
Right.
appearance fall down the list so it sort of takes its place among other things that aren't the focus of our life.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned the scale and throwing out the scale, and I think the scale can be similar in that that can be the most important thing of your morning, getting on the scale, or you can just not really care about it. Some people just step on the scale and step off, and they don't think as much about it afterward. And when it comes down in importance, then sometimes people are like, "Yeah, I just didn't really care to get on it today," or "I was in a
Mhm.
rush, so I skipped it," or "I just forgot." And so those are the
Yeah.
sort of signs that weight and shape are reducing their prominence in your thoughts, if that makes sense. And
Mhm.
again, none of this is to meet a particular standard where it's, "Okay, I'm gonna give you your diploma for recovery," because you're the boss, like, it's your life and you get to make it what you want. And when I talk with clients about recovery, I find they have very different ideas of what that looks like, and some people, "I never wanna touch a calorie counting app again. I never want to weigh my food again. I never want to, XYZ." But that's not everybody. Many other people are like, I'm okay with still tracking loosely or maintaining an awareness of how much I'm
Mhm.
eating. And then we try and also build in an awareness of eating according to your body cues, knowing that there's nothing wrong with eating something just because it tastes good or because ice cream sounds really good on a hot day, or to share something with your kid, even if you're not hungry and your kid is like, "I made this. Do you want to share it?"
Yeah.
Many people, their values would say, "Yeah, I do want those experiences in my life."
I feel like that's kind of where I've come now. Like, I remember a few Mother's Days ago, my husband and son had planned this nice breakfast and a nice lunch and a nice dinner. And instead of just enjoying the gesture and enjoying the day, I was so stressed about having three indulgent meals in a row. And that was one of the sort of trigger points for me to start really working on my relationship with food because I'm like, this is taking away my life and the person that I want to be. And I feel like I've come so far with that. Like I said, I've kind of conquered my fear foods. Like my own personal homework is to eat chips every single day so they don't have that hold on me anymore. And I feel like I've come so far. And, food doesn't control my life. I'm able to eat out. And I do have like a little bit of food noise. I'm still tracking things loosely. but it's not to the point where I feel like it's having a negative impact on my life in the day to day. So for me, I think being such a perfectionist, a lot of my recovery has been in trying to find the gray and not being so binary, so black and white. So I guess that's kind of what brought me to my question today. It's like, is this my personal definition of recovery? I've come so far from where I used to be. Am I at maybe this mecca that's shown on the internet of perfectly intuitive in a meadow eating salad every day? No,
And yet
but I'm
still
at a
being super thin, right?
yes, exactly. But I do feel like I'm at a place that feels sustainable, where I'm willing to accept the trade-off of, having a little bit of food noise or maybe putting just a little bit of thought or an extra step of thinking about what I'm eating before I eat it in exchange for not feeling so out of control. And there was a podcast episode you had recently where I really liked you stated recovery is the middle ground between too much restriction and too much excess, and that really resonated with me where I feel like I'm kind of finding that personal definition of balance in my life, but it doesn't look maybe exactly like a textbook definition of recovery, whatever that may be.
Right. Yeah, and there is no textbook. There isn't,
Yeah.
you know? Whatever definition I come up with today, in 5 years, if you ask me, I'm sure my answer will be different too. We can forget that time is going to continue to pass, and we
Mhm.
don't even know what we're gonna feel like in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. Imagine your kids being teenagers, and one of them's like, "I downloaded this app to track my calories." And you might be like, "Wow, remember when I did that? It seems like an eon ago."
Yeah.
'Cause you might just have started to not care about it in the last 10 years, which sounds strange to the person I'm talking to today because walking sounds really ridiculous to a child that can only crawl. We only know best where we are right now, and if somebody told me 10 years ago that I'd be eating and feeling the relaxation that I have with food now, I would be like, BS.
Mhm.
There's no way. So, yeah, give yourself, permission to continue to adapt and change and pivot as many times as you want to in the future. I think that's really important.
Right.
Um, so these things that some people hold up as the ultimate in recovery, no stress about food, eat whatever, that can be harmful to a person's health too. If somebody eats whatever they want whenever they want, given the biological differences between people, for some people, that will lead to consuming more food than is helpful for their bodies, and especially if somebody has grown up with the habit of using food as a coping mechanism for all sorts of emotional stuff. If somebody's like, "I'm just gonna eat whatever, whenever," this so-called feedback approach to disordered eating, and they just say, if I want chips, I'm eating chips. If I want M&Ms, I'm eating M&Ms. If I want cake, it's cake, all day long, then it typically doesn't result in the salad eating nirvana in the meadow. It usually
Mhm.
produces rapid weight gain and somebody who's now really unhappy for a completely different reason, and they still don't feel peaceful around food. So I think, as you referenced, the middle ground isn't complete lack of care or attention to our nutrition, nor is it complete laser focus on restriction and regiment. So I think some amount of flexibility is helpful. If people, I think we all feel more comfortable navigating the world when we can be psychologically flexible. Like, I
Mhm.
prefer to eat this way, but, if that's not available and I have to flex a little bit, I can do that comfortably. As you said, I wouldn't have chosen to eat in 3 indulgent meals on Mother's Day, but I wanna be able to do it so I can enjoy this experience, and I think that's a great
Yeah.
example of you recognized what it was costing you to have that, sort of caloric limit being really important in your mind, that it cost you some of the joy and connection of the
Mhm.
day, and you took steps to rebalance that, and I think that's beautiful and so commendable, and I just think that's
Oh, thank
great.
you.
I think that's just beautiful that the love and affection of people in your family that wanted to give you gifts was something that struck you as, "Wait, I want that. This isn't just an annoyance and a hurdle to my hot girl summer body." There is something really good about other people loving us and making us pancakes and all
Yeah.
that stuff, so So another term that we were talking about is the messy middle. And in your email, you said some dietitians or other influencers can talk about the messy middle as dangerous and scary um, when you're binging less but not completely recovered. And so when I read that sentence, I sort of honed in on like the dangerous. Like, what about the messy middle is dangerous was interesting to me. So, what's your take on that? What do you think it could be dangerous about being in this middle ground?
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of messaging lately. It seems to be kind of a hot topic in at least the anti-diet culture spaces I've been frequenting. And they kind of define it as this place where you've accepted that diets don't work, you're firmly rejecting diet culture, but you don't 100% trust yourself around food yet, or you're not quite able to employ intuitive eating in all of your eating. It's like you want the food freedom, but deep down, you also want to lose weight. And this sounds exactly like me, but I consider myself to have come so far and to have reached this level of recovery that I find sustainable. So is the messy middle this dangerous, scary place where my recovery is hanging on by a thread? Or is it actually just this sort of personal, bespoke definition of recovery that works for me as a person? That's why I emailed you because I wasn't
Sure,
sure.
sure. I mean, I love the use of the word bespoke. That, like, yes, we all have this like personal tailored recovery that we craft for
Mhm.
ourselves. And my impression is that the messy middle, I feel like calling it messy is almost like calling someone else messy, like, "Oh god, she's just a mess." I would
Yeah.
never call somebody else, "Oh, they're in the messy middle." Um, I wouldn't use the word messy to be, pejorative, like, "Oh, don't be in the messy middle. You wanna get completely over to recovery, so buy my products," right? Take my class, all that. But at the same time, I like the use of the word messy because it gives permission to be messy, to be confused, to be inconsistent, to be variable day to day, and that humanity is messy. We're
Mhm.
not machines, and isn't that awesome that we have all this variability and, we change our minds and we change our behaviors, and I don't think there's anything dangerous. I think using the word dangerous can add more fear into the equation than is really necessary, and I think when a person is, as you described, in progress in their recovery, they're not where they started, you're not instant pudding, you're not gonna be done in 5 minutes. You're gonna have a
Mhm.
long time of growth and progress here, so, yeah, the messy middle is probably the whole journey from the moment you started until we die. I don't think too many people are going to have a complete cessation of growth and development and evolution. So it's like, yeah, we are forever in the messy middle. All of us are
Yeah.
in the messy middle, and it's okay to be a mess. Um, I think binges that happen infrequently are really great signals because they can teach us so much about what's going
Mhm.
on. And I don't like to pathologize binges in the sense that, like, we need to do everything we possibly can, and it's a disaster if you binge. You know, I try and take a lighter approach, like, these are things we wanna reduce the frequency and intensity of, but if it happens, that's okay. Let's just take a look at what happened. This isn't an earth-shattering, life-ending sort of thing. You just ate too much food. Sorry, you probably had an uncomfortable night, but let's, see what we can learn here. Have you noticed any pattern to the binges that you still have? Or would you say you even lose control and maybe they're just overeating incidents?
Yeah. Yeah, what you just said really resonates. I think, this is probably common too with a lot of your clients, but anytime you have any sort of loss of control, whether it's the joyless compulsion of binging or a little bit of mindless eating or some overeating, I think it all kinda gets caught up in this web of shame and you have a hard time parsing out which behavior is actually happening. For me, for sure, one trigger is being home alone when the kids are in bed in the evening, and that for sure, it's that sort of unconscious autopilot, I think you call it, urge to just go to the pantry and eat chips. And that's definitely one pattern that I have. For some reason, every time I know that I'm overly restricting, it manifests in me binging on crackers dipped in margarine. That is like
Super
my
specific.
Yeah, it's like my tell. I know that it's an actual binge when I'm eating that specific combination, and that hasn't happened in a long time now. Sometimes it is just like a few chips out of the pantry that become too many, and I think psychologically and maybe physically, I process it more like a binge. But as I said in my email, the quantity and quality have decreased so much that I don't know if it's just like a vestigial habit that I've had for so long that I'm still just trying to slowly decrease the frequency of. But I truly don't feel restricted in my day to day. It's not like I'm weighing every bit of food or I'm not using any calorie counting apps, but I just have a loose number. After all those years, it's
It's
really
hard
hard
not
to
to.
get rid of that database. Yeah. So I always have like a sort of a loose running tally, but not in a way that I feel like negatively affects my day to day.
Great. Yeah, I mean, calorie awareness doesn't have to be a problem,
Mhm.
and that's okay. But just, like, having an awareness, where's my money going? An awareness of how much internet am I consuming? An awareness of how much food am I consuming? You know, do I feel like I'm overshooting or undershooting? I think, isn't a problem, and in fact, it can be helpful to have that calorie awareness in terms of deciding if a meal is adequate for you. Let's say I go to a restaurant and I order, but it's smaller than I expected. And so, like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, "Wow, that's like a really small sandwich and a little salad. That's probably like 200, 300, 400 calories. Like, that's 400 calories is not a lunch for me. I'm gonna need to get some more food." And that's when I'm gonna be like, "Hi, can I have, a side of this or a side of that?" Because I can predict that's not going to be enough for me, and it could clue me into needing to get some more food. So
Mhm.
it can be useful that way. I think what has helped a lot of people that I've worked with is trading in the running calorie total that goes throughout the day where you're like, "Where am I at? I'm at
Yeah.
1,350, by this time of day. Am I ahead of pace or behind pace compared to my usual?" And aiming for a more meal to meal centered and aiming for an appropriate calorie intake at breakfast, ballpark appropriate calorie intake at lunch, ballpark appropriate amount at dinner. And if you feel like you stray over that, not adjusting to try and reach some daily total. So, not trying to compensate for something that happened earlier because we all know what it's like to get to dinner and be like, "Well, I have 150 calories left.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm gonna have cucumbers for dinner." So trying to approach a more meal by meal, meeting my needs goal. For some people, we're talking about eating adequately. It's not just about the calories, but also about, am I getting enough of the things my body needs, like protein? Am I getting fruits and vegetables? Am I getting enough carbohydrates? Am I getting enough fat to make sure this lasts me for several hours? And as I said earlier, how other things can sort of knock appearance down in your priority list, other things can supplant the calorie total as what you're looking for in a meal. It could be that what you're looking for in a meal is, I want a good source of protein, some fruits and vegetables, some starches, and some fat. And that gives our brain something to focus on, making sure we have this balanced meal that checks all these boxes. Uh, for many people, when they've begun to practice that, it starts to feel better, for lack of a more accurate descriptor. It just feels like I'm making sure I have what I need as opposed to I'm on a leash and I can only have this much.
I think I went too far with permission to eat, the first step of intuitive eating at the start. I think lots of people are like, I'm going to have donuts and cake and whatever for breakfast. And I'm a morning workout person and realizing that doing high intensity interval training on a donut in my stomach is not the best
Oh,
feeling, right?
yeah,
And
that's a hard one.
trying to find I always use the term flexible structure in my recovery. I am someone that I do need a little bit of a framework and a little bit of a structure and like a loose sort of idea of what I'm going to have each day and when and the size of each meal and snack, but the flexibility built into that of what exactly I'm picking and how that can change from day to day. And I find that very helpful for me as
Yeah.
well. And, being a parent, you learn to track your kids not track, but look at their intake of food over a week. Because if you've ever been around little kids, there are some days where they pick one single crumb for dinner and then go to bed and you're like, okay. And then the next day they'll eat a man-sized meal. So thinking about what they take in over a week versus the day to day really helps you, I think, relax as a parent. And I try to take that approach with myself. There are going to be some hungry days and some less hungry days, and trying to zoom out, big picture, that sort of thing. That's really hard for, I think, perfectionists to do,
Mm.
is try to take it as a series of days, not just one bad day sticking out and trying to overcompensate for that, but understanding like the natural ebbs and flows that take place over a long enough period of time.
So, would you say for yourself personally that if you dieted or restricted too much, that let's say, a crackers with margarine incident would be more likely?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So
it's like a perfect predictor. Yes.
okay, it's like a one-to-one correlation here.
It is. Yeah.
And so, is that something you would eat on a normal basis?
No. So, as a little anecdote, so I, started my therapy process like a year and a half ago, but I was a bridesmaid in my friend's wedding, and her husband happens to be friends with like only guys I went to high school with. And I found this to be very distressing. And I ended up, kind of cheating on my therapist and doing a bit of a restriction. And I could tell it was too much. It was more like a 250 to 400 calorie deficit per day, and I could tell it was too much right away because I was starting to want to eat the crackers and the margarine. Like, it was
Mhm.
so specific. And that's kind of how I landed at this, very slow, very sustainable, sort of loose intake of like a very small deficit where I can tell that I'm, you know, feeling my body appropriately. I'm able to work out and I feel good. I don't feel restricted at all. And I know that I'm at a level that is sustainable for me, even if it's a glacial pace, because I'm not going back to the crackers and the margarine. I haven't even thought about it since I've been like, okay, we need to stop this like wedding diet because it's not working. And I can tell my body is rebelling. Like, I don't have control over it.
Yeah. It seems like some of the things that you're doing may actually be preventing you from backsliding,
Mhm.
right? Like keeping an awareness of how much you're eating and what you're putting on your plate and looking forward to meals and making sure your meal is not delayed perpetually or skipped can be really important in terms of protecting the progress you've already made.
Yeah.
When people have a history of disordered eating, I think it's important for them to understand that some awareness or protection of the progress that they've made is going to be necessary going forward. It doesn't mean, oh, you're always going to have to do these worksheets and fill in the tracker and, log your hunger and fullness ratings and your emotions all day long. But yeah, you're probably going to want to pay some attention to yourself for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that's not a terrible thing to,
Yeah.
really try and notice, how am I doing? What's going on with me emotionally? Have I eaten enough? Do I need a drink of water? And maintaining that awareness doesn't have to mean it all consuming focus, but just making sure that we're not cutting ourselves short in any way because that can be the role that the eating disorder was trying to play for us. Oftentimes, eating disorders result from a person who's lost some touch or never really known what their own needs and desires were. And so if the behavior of eating becomes a bit of a surrogate. And so if we don't want to be using food for all those things, then we want to make sure we are still filling that role for ourselves to check out, like, do I need some emotional comfort here? Do I need some rest? Am I working too much and not having any fun? Because that's when I start craving experiences with food that don't feel good afterward. So I think some of what you're doing that makes you question if you're not recovered may be what helps you maintain the recovery that you've gotten so far. Does that make any sense?
It does, it does. And what you said earlier about maybe the messy middle is just this lifelong journey. It does match with sort of what I've been feeling internally and what my therapist said too. When I first went in there, I'm like, "Oh, I'm this close to being fully recovered. Can you help me get over the hump?" And she's like, "I hate to break it to you, but the society that we live in and maybe your specific personality and your history, it's a lifelong learning process, and one that you said you have to pivot and adjust throughout your entire life, and that's not what some people wanna hear. You expect to, like, read a couple of books, listen to a couple podcasts, and then just be on your way, intuitively eating the rest of your
Yeah.
life, and she's like, "That's not the reality for most people," and it is about sort of finding that amount of guardrails to protect your peace where you're not letting yourself eat with reckless abandon, and also not trying to control and restrict every amount, but trying to find that middle ground, which I aspire to, but then some people say is messy. trying to find that balance in that gray area where I feel an appropriate amount of safety and permission at the same time.
Yeah. You can always do experiments as well. If somebody asked you, "Would you like to trade in your car?" You're like, "Well, what am I trading it for?" And so if somebody's like, "Well, do you want to change this level of recovery you're at?" You're like, "Well, make me an offer. What's what's the next one? Because I don't know what it feels like to be in a spot that I've never been before." So sometimes I encourage people to try experiments and see what happens. Sometimes life will hand you an experiment. For example, one of my clients went on a multi-week camping trip in an RV, and she's like, "I'm not gonna bring the scale in the RV. I think my husband will flip his lid if I bring the scale in the RV." We talked about how this could be a really good stretch for her to spend 3 weeks without the scale and to try and focus a little more on, am I eating when I'm hungry? Am I stopping when I'm satisfied? Because if I do those things, the scale is not gonna do anything drastic, and it ended up being a great success for her. Now, I don't think she's ready to give up on the scale completely, but that was a really nice experiment that I think severed one of the threads in the rope binding her to the scale, to just see what it was like to have a while without it. Another client of mine, Heather, that many people know from the all access version of the podcast, she's been working with me for quite a long time, and she's been doing the tracker of skills like eat when you're hungry, stop when you're satisfied, but she has still been tracking her calories. And so a couple weeks ago, I was like, "So what do you think about not tracking calories?" And we had this just like I just floated the idea because I certainly don't tell people what to do. Everybody's adults. And by the end of the conversation, she was like, "I wanna not use it this week. I wanna make it the whole week just feeling whether I'm hungry and satisfied." And so I was like, "Okay." And then she did it for a second week. And I think where she's at now is probably coming to the end of her 3rd week, and she still hasn't said, "Okay, I'm done with it forever," nor has she said, "I hate this, I'm going back to it." She's still making her mind up after taking a test drive of life without tracking. And so
Right.
nothing bad can come from that. Nothing bad can come from an increased awareness. And sometimes we're really afraid to give some piece of control up, but then when we do, we realize things feel better without it. I didn't actually need it. For the longest time, I wouldn't eat peanut butter if I couldn't measure it. I will not measure all sorts of other foods. I've been eating unmeasured foods for eons, but I still ate peanut butter out of a measuring spoon, or if I, sat down to put it on my toast, I scooped it out of the jar with a measuring spoon and then put it on the toast. It was like a holdout for me.
Yeah.
And then one day, I just didn't feel like getting up to get the spoon. Just slapped it on the toast and carried on, and I was like, "Well, that was relievingly anticlimactic." Like, absolutely nothing happens. You can just put peanut butter on the bread, turns out. And
Yeah.
it was one of those micro victories that adds up to be such a complete change in your life, and you just stack all of them together. So, yeah, doing experiments is not a binding commitment. If you decide I wanna try and not track calories, or I'm going to focus more on how hungry and satisfied I am, even if that means more calories one day, let me see if that leads to less calories another day. How much does my natural appetite vary if I'm not forcing it to be day-to-day consistent?
Right.
Little extensions of trust are the only way that we build trust.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts?
I guess I'll just be messy for the rest of my life, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and, like, we are all in the messy middle, like, with food, with our emotional development, with our relationships, with just navigating this world, which can be so surprising and tragic and beautiful all at the same time, and,
Yeah.
like, yeah, we're all in this messy middle, so, you get to explore, where you want to be, and anything that produces a pattern you don't like bringing up cravings to eat crackers and margarine, is an invitation to examine the cause and effect relationships at play and see what you might wanna shift in there. For the listeners at home who are like, "Wow, I think I'm in the messy middle too." Some things that are helpful to consider, are you living the life you want in terms of the amount of time and energy you spend thinking about food? And is it costing you anything? Tina gave this great example of the Mother's Day incident, and so you might consider, is it costing you enjoying nice dates with your significant other, or is it costing you the ability to try new restaurants? And so if you want the themes of food or weight and shape or working out to be less dominant in your life, try to take some actions and consider what other things you might promote in your life to be more worthy of your time and attention. And then, how much does calorie tracking really bother you? Whether somebody on the internet says it's really good or it's really bad or it's harmless doesn't matter as much as, like, how much does it bother you? Because individuals vary widely. I know some people are like, absolutely not. I hate it. I detest it. And then other people feel like, I'm perfectly happy with it. I don't know what's the big deal. I'm going to track forever. It doesn't cause me any stress. So, like, let's not tell each other what's good or bad. Let's just try and recognize for ourselves what are the outcomes. And then I always ask people, if you still lose control around food, how much does that bother you? Because there is a very real possibility that it doesn't bother you at the current frequency that it's occurring. And it is normal to overeat on occasion. Remember, people who have never been in this sphere will overeat at times, but they won't be exceptionally bothered by it. And that is one of the hallmarks that separates binge eating disorder from just regular overeating, is how upset do I get when I overeat? And so one milepost on the journey to healing is when you overeat, not being so extremely bothered by it, but being like, whoops, some extra food and moving on, as opposed to like, oh my God, I'm shaking, I'm nauseous, I'm panicking here because I ate extra. Then if you do find that you're really bothered by it, looking into that. There's always more to learn about ourselves. And then my last point to everybody listening is, remember, you don't have to decide or commit to anything long term today. You can decide where I am right now feels good, and you can change your mind in a week or a month or a year. And what feels good enough now may feel like in 5 years, when you have maybe young children watching you, like, "Oh, maybe I do wanna try and re-angle my behaviors around food a little bit," and that's perfectly okay. You have unlimited, take it from the top again cards. Tina, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I think these conversations give so much life to the podcast, so it's not just me droning on an endless monologue, but getting some fresh insight from other people, and you have great ideas, and you've just come so far with your own recovery. I love hearing these stories.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your nuanced and reasonable takes. I find you're really good at kind of finding that gray area and presenting that sort of balanced idea of recovery that people like me, especially, really latch onto and find value in. So
Oh,
thank you for having me.
thanks so much. Hope to see you all next week in the next episode.